All right, chapter 21 of the book of Genesis. Not a long one, again, a little short one, but we do talk about Abimelech a little bit more in here and what's going on. So the rest of the story continuing forward. Sarah, bears Isaac. He is circumcised. Hagar and her son are cast out of Abraham's household. The Lord saves Hagar and Ishmael. Abraham and Abimelech deal honorably with each other. So verse 1, and the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken, meaning Abraham was promised that Sarah would have a child. Remember, when the angel of the Lord came to Abraham and said, Sarah's going to have a child, and then the angel of the Lord came to Sarah and had the child, what happened? They both laughed at the angel. That was a couple chapters ago. They laughed at the angel, and the angel said, you're going to name your son Isaac, which actually means laughter. So to remind them, you scoffed at the Lord, and the Lord is fulfilling his promise. For verse 2, and Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age. I think Abraham was around 100 around this time, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. So remember, he's following the traditions, following the obedience of what he had been told to do in previous chapters. Verse 5, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. So we get the confirmation. He was 100. Imagine having a child at 100 years old. Whew. Now, of course, they were a lot healthier back then. They didn't have air pollution and water pollution and sugars and chemicals and hazards and glyphosate and all that fun stuff that gets into our food these days. So he's probably in a lot better shape than what we would be in our time. Let's see, verse 6. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that will laugh with me. That's, again, Isaac. That's his name. In verse 6a, in fact, it says the Hebrew root tazakah means both to laugh and to rejoice. Thus, there is double meaning implied in its use here. So even Isaac maybe isn't just about to laugh, but to rejoice. That could be also why he is named Isaac, to rejoice. Even though Abraham and Sarah laughed and kind of scoffed at it, it also could be to rejoice. And maybe that's what they meant by the word laughter in there too, is instead of laughing at the angel, they actually meant rejoice at the message the angel had. So sometimes meanings get a little lost in translation, especially when they go through years and years of retranslation and other things. So this is why it's good to learn and understand some of the meanings of things to help us gain more insight. Verse 7, and she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. So it's like, who would have guessed this would have happened? Verse 8, and the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. So the challenge here was, you remember, Hagar had a son. Remember, Sarah couldn't bear, so she gave Abraham her handmaid, who was an Egyptian, and she bare a son, okay? You got to remember that, Ishmael. And then now Ishmael is older because this is several years. Many years have gone by. Ishmael's probably somewhere between 10 and 20, I would assume, at this time. And he is mocking the fact that he has a little brother, a half-brother, basically. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, so this is Sarah. Remember, Sarah was pretty jealous before when Hagar got pregnant and had a baby. So she cast her out, and the Lord sent her back to stay at the house of Israel. So Sarah had some issues with this other woman. Therefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. So there's a problem here, okay? Sarah's like, kick him out. He is not going to inherit the same stuff as my son. My son's better than him. My son should be the firstborn, the one that gets the birthright and stuff, not her son. She was a servant. So this is the challenge that Abraham's got to deal with now. So verse 12, and God said unto Abraham, and so there's probably a good chance in here that while we don't have this, there's probably a good chance that Abraham went and prayed like he's done in the past to ask God, okay, now what do I do? My wife wants to kick Hagar and her son out. There's some bad issues between the two of them. They don't necessarily like each other a lot. What do I do? God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah has said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. So he says basically, don't fret over this. Hearken to the voice of your wife in this matter. But realize I will take care of Hagar and her son because he is a descendant of you, and I gave you a promise to make your seed a nation. His seed will also be a nation, but your name will carry on through Isaac. And that, if we think about it, that's kind of getting to the idea of the priesthood moving forward through Isaac, not Ishmael, or not. Did I say? I think I said that right. So verse 14, Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So you can find a little bit more. We learn about Beersheba a little bit later, but that's where they went, this open wilderness of Beersheba. And you can look that up and understand more about that as well if you'd like to. Verse 15, the water was spent in the bottle. She cast the child under one of the shrubs. So when she ran out of water, she hid the baby. She cast her son, which is probably, like it says, 10 or 20, under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. So think of shooting a bow, an arrow. So how far can an arrow go? That's about how far away she was. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. So they're pretty much out of the supplies that they were given by Abraham. And she's like, I guess we're going to die. So I'm going to set my son here. Son, you stay here. I'll be back. And she goes off because she doesn't want to have to. She's praying and asking, I don't want to have to see the death of my son. I don't see this. It's not good. Verse 17, and God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, what aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad, but where he is. So he knows what's going on here. And he's giving her a chance to answer. I like this, that God's not coming down going, look, I know what you're going through. I can see what you're doing. He gives her a chance. He's asking her a question. Even though he knows what's going on, he's giving her a chance to talk. I like this. This is a great example of sharing agency. Just like when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden and they were naked and they hid themselves, I'm sure God knew exactly where they were. But he didn't say, hey, you guys, get out from behind that bush. Come here. What's going on? He said, where are you, Adam and Eve? And he let them make the choice to come out. So I like this, that God preserves this opportunity for us to still make choices and decisions and to talk frankly with him. So let's go on. Verse 18, arise, lift up the lad, hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, which is in the Bible dictionary. And his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. So they lived in the wilderness of Haran. They're kind of out away. They didn't settle in a city. They kind of built their own little dwelling. But she went to Egypt to find him a wife. So they probably weren't far from there. Verse 22, and it came to pass at that time that Abimelech, remember him from last chapter, and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God, that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me, and to the land where thou hast sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. So we've switched gears. We're not talking about Hagar and Ishmael at this point. We're switching back to Abimelech and Abraham. So a little bit of a scene change there, basically. And Abimelech's going, hey, I want you to deal justly with me, because obviously the first time they met, or at least the last time they met, Abraham lied, sort of, to Abimelech and caused God to threaten Abimelech. So Abimelech's like, look, you need to promise me that you're going to deal honest with me while you're here in our land, and you deal with my sons after me and my son's sons, that kind of thing. And Abraham says, yes, I will. So verse 25, and Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. So the challenge was that there was a well that Abimelech's servants had used force to kick people away from. Probably their land. They probably kicked animals away from it. People trying to water their animals, those kinds of things. Maybe that's not too different from a story we learned from the sons of with Ammon, if you remember, from the king's servants in the Book of Mormon. But instead of the violent reprisal back to them, we hear Abraham goes back and says, but your people have not been kind about this well. And Abimelech said, I wot not who hath done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard I of it, but today. So Abimelech's going, I haven't heard about this. Somebody's doing something in my kingdom, and they didn't tell me. That wasn't a command from me for them to take that well. So these are some of his troops, some of his maybe captains or people who are kind of using their authority and power under Abimelech to push people back from this well and deal with this. So now Abraham, in verse 27, and Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? And he said, for these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. So this well that people were shied away from, Abraham's going, I own the well. I made it. I dug that well. That's mine. And so he's setting these 7 ewe lambs aside as a symbol to let him know that on top of the covenant we've made, and we've exchanged some animals to prove our covenant, there's these other 7 ewe lambs, basically, that we're giving. Now, the number 7, if you look at some of the numerology, number 7, I forgot. Number 7, I think, means heaven, I believe. I think so. I'd have to look it up. I have to go look at my reference on that one. But so numbers sometimes mean things, which is interesting to look at how they get used over time. So this is where he dug this well. Verse 31 now, wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear both of them. Now, here's what's interesting, okay? This is the place called Beersheba. We heard about this earlier, if you remember, when Hagar was kicked out. So if we look back up here, that they were wandering in the wilderness of Beersheba in verse 14. So we learn about Beersheba, that this place was Beersheba, known as Beersheba, because Abraham and Abimelech made a covenant of this area, basically, and that Abraham dug that well. Now, verse 32, thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up, and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. So Abimelech could have been the Philistines. This could be the beginning of what we know as the Philistines later on. Verse 30, there's actually, let's see, where did that go? Joseph Smith translation for this has a little bit more in the appendix. So let's look at this. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, rose up, and they planted a grove in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, and they returned unto the land of the Philistines. So they didn't just leave, they actually planted a grove there in memorial of this, and called on the Lord, and then they left. Verse 32, and Abraham worshipped the everlasting God, and sojourned in the land of the Philistines many days. So, because in verse 33 it says, and Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba, but it was Abimelech, according to Joseph Smith, Abimelech and Phicol, his chief captain, who did this. And they called on the name of the Lord, and Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. So this is interesting, because this could mean Abimelech is the king of the Philistines that we hear of later, of course, with King David. Philistines are in the Bible dictionary. You can look them up. Here's some interesting information we learn about them. This says they most likely were a seafaring people who came from an island around 1200 BC and destroyed many coastal cities and tried to destroy Egypt, then settled in an area of Palestine called the Levant. This was around the time of the earthquakes and volcano activity that may have been when Joseph was in Egypt. Many of the Mesopotamian kingdoms fell or were ruined around this time. Lots of economic upheaval. A lot of challenges were happening. A lot of things going on, basically. So this is kind of getting us some ideas of where the Philistines came from, basically. So some interesting stuff we get for 21. Not a long chapter, but some interesting points that we get. So stay tuned for chapter 22.